Εξομολογήστε το Κύριο ότι αγαθός, αλληλούια.
Ότι στον αιώνα το έλεος αυτού, αλληλούια.
How are you, Billy?
I'm good, yeah.
How's your...
How are you?
Yes.
Did you read that book I lent you?
Not yet. Do you want it back?
No, you're welcome. I want to see what you thought of it.
Not yet, not yet. Are you reading the books that I gave you?
I've read some of the one you gave me on politics. I read some of it.
And what are your thoughts around politics and Christianity?
Well, it depends Christianity from what period and where.
Well, no, in terms of... No, I agree that Christians have expressed their political ambitions differently over different times.
Yeah.
But the Christian political narrative has always remained the same. So in more modern times, we Christians, because of the Enlightenment, have forgotten that we've got a political agenda. There's something that emerges from our faith, and that we should seek to pursue that. That's something that we're only just rediscovering, you know. But the political narrative about establishing the kingdom of God on earth and governing and discipling nations according to the teachings of Christ, that remains the same regardless of what time that we're in. Though I would say we need to borrow from pre-Enlightenment times and bring them into modernity with modern applications. I mean, do you think, because you're someone who recognises that this country is losing its Christian heritage, like we've just seen, for example, the abolition of jury trials, which the jury trials was established at the behest of a bishop.
Yeah.
I think his name was Bishop Stephen, against King John II, saying that we should have jury trials and that people shouldn't be detained by the king's leisure without a jury trial, you know. And so we're seeing this country de-Christianize.
Yeah. I mean, the scrapping of jury trials is very Hitlerish, Stalinish, and it is worrying.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, I thought we were supposed to be a democracy.
Yes.
You know, because they say like, oh, it's only going to be for crimes that aren't serious. But the problem is, you could still get a criminal record. Essentially, you could have a panel say you're guilty, you'd not have the chance to have your say.
Yeah.
When actually you could go to a lawyer, and a lawyer might say, actually, you could argue your case, you're not guilty. You might actually win in court and get found not guilty.
Yeah.
And then you might have a criminal record under your name.
But I would say detaining someone for 2 years is still pretty serious. Like if I locked you in a room for 2 years, that's a pretty serious crime. And I don't think that should be done without sentencing by jury.
Yeah.
But for us to argue in favour of sentencing by jury, we are
holding someone on remand.
No, I mean that if you're found guilty of a crime, it shouldn't be done at the behest of a judge. Because, you know, the Crown prosecution, the solicitors of the Crown prosecution and the defence solicitors, they work in a circuit of courts. So the same judges get to meet the same lawyers over and over and over and over
they all
again.
know each other outside.
Yeah.
When you go out courts, like a Crown court, you'll see members of the CPS and the criminal defence barrister having a fag together.
Exactly.
Like close friends.
And so the problem with handing this over or handing it all over to professionals who all know one another, and who now we've seen are clearly politicised, you know, which should be made illegal. Like a judge should be outlawed from being involved in any overt or even subvert political programme. They must be they must be paid well, like very well. But the price of that high wage is that they surrender certain civic rights to perform certain civic duties.
And maintain neutrality.
Yeah, but better than that, we should be maintaining the Christian tradition of trial by jury, which is a very particularly English way of expressing Christian justice. The idea that your equals, your peers, are the best judges of your innocence or guilt is based on the idea that we have equality before the law, and that we have equal dignity under the law, and that we have equal capacity under the law.
Yeah, 100%.
You know? And what we're seeing with the abolition of trial by jury is the abolition of a Christian principle. So, again, I'm just making the case for a more Christian state. Now, someone who's abandoned political Islam, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you feel about someone who's advocating political Christianity.
I don't really want like religion to have authority, but I'm happy to say we shouldn't abandon heritage.
Yeah.
We should at least be educated to acknowledge where our values, where our ideas, how our language developed, where it stems from.
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe in saying, oh, you know, you should believe this or you should think this. What I'm saying is we should go, actually, we have a custom of this,
Yeah.
and it comes from this,
Yeah.
and we can't ignore that fact.
Yeah.
We should appreciate that fact, and I think that's how, one of the ways, you know, like...
You're like an Edmund Burke conservative.
We've heard politicians, Labour and Conservative, and even Lib Dem, whatever, talk about British values in the school system. But it's like there's the value, but then you have to understand a value. You've got to understand what formed certain ideas, what inspired people as a collective to implement certain things. And in the history of this country, even though I don't believe in Christianity, it's being historically ignorant to ignore the impact and significance Christianity holds. Even in, like, at school, like, you learn English literature, you do like Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we didn't have, for example, the King James Bible, would we have had the type of literature that centuries later someone like Shakespeare produced?
Yeah.
We wouldn't. It stems, our written language, our linguistics, is from Christian tradition.
Yes, but I would say to you, because you said you don't want religion to have a say on power, but I would say to you that two things. Firstly, we've got to decide how we decide what is legal and illegal.
Yeah.
And to do that, we've got to appeal to some kind of moral code. And
that's what religion does for us.
that is exactly. The moment you start making decisions about what's right and what's wrong, you are doing religious activity. You know.
Yeah, I accept that.
Right. So, secondly, in terms of the tradition of this country, from the time of Alfred the Great, and with every king up until the present king, the church and the state have always been together informing our laws. Now, Sarah Mullally, the non-Archbishop of Canterbury, is absconding on her responsibility because she's about to go on a pilgrimage in a very timely way, so she never has to vote on whether abortion up to the day of birth should be legal or illegal. So it is possible for these systems to fail, and to fail in their duties. But it is an English Christian tradition that the state and the church help to form our laws. You know. And if you want to be proud English, if you want to recapture your English inheritance, you should seek to embolden and strengthen that relationship between church and state. You know. Now I can understand, as someone who's involved in political Islam, why you might have hang-ups around that whole area, around that whole issue.
Yeah, there's an emotional aspect, but also there's the issue of, like, I agree with a lot of what you say, but one of the things I disagree with, and we spoke about a couple of years ago now, the concept of, like, blasphemy law. I believe in the right to criticize and insult.
Yeah.
I think one of the best ways we can make a more tolerant society speech, because at the end of the day, speech is a reflection of people's thoughts.
Yeah.
You can't stop people thinking.
No.
So I wouldn't like to see people being fined or imprisoned for taking the piss out of a religious belief, whatever religion it is.
Yeah.
I think they should have the right to do it.
Right. So let me reply to that, because this is one of the things that I think a lot of the conservative movement get wrong, is they talk about, you know, they often confuse and conflate classical liberalism with Christianity. And then they'll say freedom of speech comes from Christianity, which
I don't think that.
It definitely doesn't. No, it comes from the Enlightenment, pure and simple.
Yeah, of course.
Like, you read the Ten Commandments, and blasphemy is a proper category.
Exactly.
So I do believe in a blasphemy law, but I believe it in a limited sense.
Okay, yeah.
So I believe that it should be for public employees and for people on public land.
No beheadings.
No beheadings, even for blasphemy, no beheadings. But what we should do is we should prevent, whilst for instance, in this park, say my vision of society was in play. In this park, you should be free to make arguments and criticize Christianity because I'm evangelizing you. And that would be a caveat in the law. If a Christian approaches you for evangelism, you should then be free to argue back because that allows for genuine engagement.
Yeah.
Right? But someone shouldn't be able, like the Pussy Riots did in Moscow, where they went into the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour and they mocked and ridiculed the Christian faith in a church. That should be punishable.
Okay. So I kind of get your logic with that because they've intentionally gone to the place of worship
to mock, to ridicule.
So what about then you have people that will pay, they'll spend a lot of money to see a live show from someone like Ricky Gervais or Jimmy Carr. They will take the piss out of the gospel, out of church tradition and all sorts. If people pay to watch that sort of thing, they know what they're going to get. Do you think someone should be allowed to go on a hall on a stage? And if people want to pay to see that, they can?
If it is in private property that's not receiving any government finances or money, then yes. But if say that theatre was receiving money from the government, then no.
Okay,
right?
Fair enough,
Like if you want to blaspheme, mock and ridicule Christianity, then you do it in private space.
It's their business, it's their responsibility.
If they're paying for it, then it's got nothing to do with the government.
Fair enough.
But if the government's paying for it, then the government is a Christian state, and anything that is receiving government money has to live by the expectations of the state, which is that you don't mock or ridicule Christianity. You can mock and ridicule the church, you can mock and ridicule Christians, but you wouldn't mock Jesus Christ, you wouldn't mock the Holy Trinity, you wouldn't mock the sacraments, you wouldn't mock, the crucifixion or the resurrection, because it's really important that we don't poison the well that nourishes our culture. And Christianity forms the metaphysical well that supplies the nutrients to enrich our cultural life, which then downstream goes into our government, goes into our laws, goes into our customs and our practices. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. Since the 1960s, we cut ourselves off from Christianity. And since the 1960s, we've been de-Christianizing the UK. And the abolition of jury trials is just the latest example of a long process of de-Christianization. But that started when it became acceptable to mock and to ridicule Christianity, like the life of Brian, for example. And that's why you've got to guard it.
Fair enough.
So, there you go.
It's interesting to hear your perspective, just because when I hear blasphemy law, I'm a bit like, oh shit.
Yeah, I do want a blasphemy law. I just think it's got to be, but I would have a limited and restricted blasphemy law.
So it would only apply to public servants, really.
Public servants, public spaces, right?
So you wouldn't necessarily. So would you have a problem with this place?
There would be a caveat which says that you would have a defence under law that says. Is that mine or yours?
I think it's yours.
If I was the one writing the law, it would be that you would have a defence under law that stated that if a Christian approached you for evangelism, that would grant you full free speech. But if you stood in a public space and desecrated a Bible or smashed up an icon...
So would you be okay if someone was to under your ideal state, someone comes here and gets on the ladder and does a Jimmy Carr type performance, mocking the church, the Gospels, or whatever, you wouldn't allow that?
If he had not been approached by a Christian, no, that would be illegal.
Okay, right, that's where we differ. I think just just let people say what they want.
If he was criticising Christianity, like making an intellectual argument, so there'd be defences under the law, because in law what you get is you get the law and then you get appropriate defences under the law. So one would be is that it would be a defence under the law that you're making a cogent argument. Another defence under the law would be that a Christian approached you for evangelism, for the purposes of evangelising you, right? These would grant you the ability to speak in public spaces, right? But if you were just coming and, like some of these Muslims do, they come to this park and they just insult Christianity. Yeah? That would be illegal. And it should be illegal, you know? Because blasphemy is a genuine biblical category. And if we're going to have a Christian state that's in keeping with our Christian traditions, in keeping with our Christian customs, then blasphemy should be a law. Islam shouldn't receive any protection under the law, but Christianity should. You know?
My cartoons are safe then.
Your cartoons are safe. Your cartoons are completely safe. Have you got anything you want to talk about in terms of Christianity?
Not Christianity today, really.
Or anything?
No. I more just came to watch.
Fair enough.